Hi, this is O'Connor, and welcome back. We are near the end, but let's not get to the end before we understand more about frauds undertaken against you, the consumer. Yes, consumer fraud, chapter 15. This is where we are at. And the learning objectives, after studying this chapter, you should be able to define what consumer fraud is and understand its seriousness, understand identity theft, and classify various types of investment and consumer frauds. Now, I want to try and give a little bit more structure than what is given in the chapter in terms of the pyramid above me here. And that is, there's this notion of scams out there, which can be said to be different from consumer fraud, but they still target consumers as victims. And then there's investment fraud. What I want to do is for you to have a better appreciation of what is a scam, what is consumer fraud, and what is investment fraud. And there is a reason why we want to be able to tell the difference, and I'll tell you in the next slide. Here we have a table talking about the aspects of consumer scams, consumer fraud, and investment scams and frauds. Just for now, I've colored in green associated with consumer scams. It's important as a fraud investigator to know consumer scams because it may require you to analyze the digital footprints, email forensics, and website authenticity. Whereas with consumer fraud, you may need to scrutinize business practices, contracts, and consumer complaints. On the other hand, with investment scams and frauds, it may require you to have understanding of financial instruments, market analysis, and insider trading detection. Wow. Going back to the victims that are targeted or scammed, consumer scams typically involve small transactions affecting many individuals, and support includes advising on chargebacks, meaning that you are talking to the financial institution to get money back on your credit card. With consumer fraud, transactions may involve larger individual losses. Support includes legal recourse and compensation advice. With investment scam and frauds, often involves significant losses. Support includes legal action, asset recovery strategies. And here we are talking about Ponzi schemes as a great example. Why does this matter for you as a fraud examiner? It also matters for you as a fraud examiner to know the difference because the laws governing scams, consumer fraud, investment scams can be different. The laws governing scams are more likely to be found in the government statutes where it is a crime to undertake these scams. They are transitory. Whereas consumer fraud, the laws protecting consumers are likely to be found in consumer protection laws, although there can be criminal proceedings undertaken in that area. And of course, the laws surrounding investment scam and frauds, borrowing from previous chapters, can be associated with the dictates of the stock exchanges, federal laws, and other criminal statutes. Wow. So this is why, as a fraud investigator, we need to know the difference. Another way of distinguishing the difference between scams and consumer frauds is with the scams, as you can see just here, all right, the examples like phishing emails, lottery scams, investment scams. Remember, there's a bit of overlap. Right? Investment scams, we're asking you to invest money. You think you're going to get a return, but you might be part of a Ponzi scheme. But the characteristics are they are short-term, they are transitory, and they require immediate actions by the victims. When we look at consumer fraud, on the other hand, right over there, you can see that the characteristics are they are more long-term, they have a variety of deceptive practices, and they are subject to legal action. Normally, come under the purview of consumer protection laws in the country in which you reside. If we look at the key differences, the regulation and legal action, consumer fraud is addressed by laws, whereas scams are harder to regulate because they come and go. They're always changing. And often scams are global if they are benefited by the global access of the internet. Consumer fraud, on the other hand, may appear legitimate, whereas scams are illegal and have no legitimacy at all. So on these two slides, I hope you have a greater appreciation of the difference between consumer fraud and scams. What I'm going to take you through in this video is we're going to look at scams and examples of scams. Then we're going to go on to consumer fraud and examples of consumer fraud. Then we're going to have a look at identity theft. And then we're going to finish up with investment fraud schemes. Let's get into this, shall we? Summarizing the differences again, in red, consumer fraud is subject to consumer protection laws, regulatory oversight, and legal action. Scams are subject to criminal prosecution, cybersecurity measures, and public awareness campaigns. Totally different, requiring different skills of you as the fraud investigator. So how serious are these frauds and scams? In Australia, according to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, Australians reported losses of over $2 billion to scams in 2021, probably even more in the last 2 or 3 years. The Targeting Scams report for 2021 showed a 9% increase in scam reports compared to 2020. And the common fraud types that they list are online shopping scams, investment scams, phishing scams, and fake billing scams. Now, as I go through this report here, you can start to see, oh, there's a bit of overlap here between consumer fraud and consumer scams and investment fraud. And this is why we want to try and demarcate differences between each by showing you real examples. Let's get into the scams first before we get on to consumer frauds. What we have here is a list of scams that include a mix of consumer scams and investment scams. And why I detail both here is they are very, very large, and the first half, like the first 7, are investment scams. The bottom half are more consumer-orientated scams. And as you can see, the investment scams are really, really large in the billions, hundreds of millions, whereas the consumer scams are smaller, 50 million, 100 million, but not in the billions, as you can see. One more thing, the consumer scams are across the board in terms of relating to education fraud, education visa scam, money laundering scam, insider trading, match fixing scam, and various scams associated with cryptocurrency. And of course, you've got solar panel installation scams. So consumer scams like here are transitory. They're not ongoing, and they come along, they take your money and poof, then they go away. The investment scams go on for a little bit longer because they're a Ponzi scheme, and they don't go away until they run out of new money, until they run out of new members that they are recruiting. Let me give you another breakdown of major consumer scams in Australia. There are Ponzi schemes, investment scams, which are a large portion, but the smaller numbers are, as I said, money laundering, insider trading, various scams, fraud. In the textbook, they talk about other smaller scams associated with Nigerian money letters, etc. But what we want to look at now is a real example that happened in Australia just a few months ago. And This is a professor that I had worked in the same institution at over 25 years ago, Professor Kim Sawyer. He lost over 2.5 million Australian dollars by transferring his super to a investment scheme set up by scammers. In the end, the investment scheme really wasn't a scheme at all. It wasn't a Ponzi scheme. It wasn't a pyramid scheme or that. It was, in the end, accounts which the scammers just took the money and ran, and the money gone. A lot of articles have been written by this, so do have a look. And it says, as he says, as online scams continue to rob Australians of money, banks are doing little to protect customers or reimburse victims who have been targeted. This is a scam. This is not a Ponzi scheme. This is not a pyramid scheme, which I talk about later. This was an outright scam where the scammers contacted Kim Sawyer through email and invited him to find out more about getting a higher investment for his superannuation. They posed as working through the institution of St. George's Bank, when in fact St. George's Bank knew nothing of this scam. And then when he showed interest, they actually had a phone call, and through a series of meetings over the phone, he transferred money through to accounts through St. George's Bank, which went to other bank accounts, and the scammers took the money. Just like that. Gone. Wow. All right. So that's a scam. Transitory. Right. You hear about it, and the scammers are probably, they're gone, and they'll think of something new in another country in the future. They will not do the same thing again because we know about that type of modus operandi. If that's not enough, scams are global. What do we mean? If we look at the global scams associated with social media, $2.7 billion in total estimated loss. Cryptocurrency frauds, $4.7 billion. And I'm not talking about the FTX cryptocurrency bankruptcy, Sam Bankman-Fried. And that fraud, which is more along the lines of chapters 12, 13, I'm talking about other cryptocurrency frauds, which are really transitory scams. There are romance scams, fake investment platforms, and online shopping scams. So I just want to show you that when you look at these global scams, the losses are ginormous. You as a fraud investigator, if you are tasked with investigating any of these scandals, you would have to contact international law regulatory bodies. You would have to have knowledge of international law, because often the origin of these scams is coming from another country. Often you're not going to get your money back if the origin is from another country. Wow. Okay, enough of scams. Let's move on and go to consumer frauds. Okay, these are not so transitory. They are much more longer term, and often they are associated with a legitimate business, or so they say. For example, the tourist company Aussie 4x4 Tours, the first one right up the top, had fake tours and lured over 100 tourists in giving them over 100,000 Australian dollars. Wow, the tourists were left stranded without refunds or support. If you look at some of the other frauds, they are associated with banking and financial services, where some of the institutions were charging fees for no service. For example, AMP Financial Advice Scandal, which was the sixth one listed in this list. And that was the same situation for NAB, the eighth one, where they charged fees for financial advice not provided. Or if we go down to the 11th one, Health Insurance Plus, you can see that they had misleading claims and benefits. Or the next level, sorry to mention this one, get rich education seminars. I'm not associated with them. They gave misleading seminars about how to get rich. Wow. They gave false promises, just above me here, false promises of wealth and financial success through education programs that did not deliver the advertised benefits. So you can see these are consumer frauds because in most of these cases, the fraudster are a business that is still continuing today, especially in the case of the banks like Westpac, NAB, AMP. Some of these companies are no longer existing today, like the Aussie 4x4 Tours, like the CBL Insurance Limited collapse. As you can see, these appear much more legitimate and they are subject more to the consumer protection laws that are available to consumers in your country, in this case, in Australia. Is there some way that we can group these frauds so I just don't smother you with information, give you information overload? Yes, we can. On the next slide, I've grouped it in terms of misleading and deceptive practices, financial misconduct, high pressure and unethical sales tactics, and insider and fraudulent schemes. So you can see these are not transitory. They were set up over a longer term to give misleading advice, misleading promotions to take money from consumers. So by now, you're probably confused. What's the difference between scam and consumer fraud? Well, let's go over the differences again. If we look at an example of a MasterChef finalist, now you all know MasterChef, there was this finalist was caught in a conveyancer hack whereby over $250,000 Australian dollars was given to the conveyancing firm through the particular website app on the sale of their home. The fraudsters were able to hack the system of PEXA, the Property Exchange Australia, and get access to part of that $250,000. They got access to nearly half of it before they got the bank to actually freeze the funds. In the end, the finalists lost 110,000 Australian dollars. And so the question is this a scam or is it consumer fraud? Let's go through how I see it right above here. This incident is best classified as a scam. As a scam characteristic, the hackers employed deception to gain unauthorized access to the conveyancer's email and the PAXA system. They manipulate the system to redirect funds to their own accounts. On the other hand, consumer fraud characteristics, while consumer fraud involves deceptive practices within legitimate transactions, this incident was a targeted cyber attack rather than a systematic issue within the conveyancing process itself. The conveyancing process being the taking of money and holding in an escrow account until the settlement of the property is complete. So this is a scam and not consumer fraud. In the end, PEXA, they weren't liable for that loss. They were just a platform. In the end, they did give a loan to the MasterChef finalists for the money that was lost for zero interest, but they did not reimburse the money lost. So be careful when you are transferring money to some kind of middle person that comes to you by way of an online app. Let's just finish this part for now, where we have covered what we mean by consumer scams and consumer fraud and how they are different. And there is a little bit of overlap. I've given you some examples. See you in the next session. Bye for now.